Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and in this video we are going to review all the rescripts that I wrote to make your life easier in Reaper when editing video and long forms of audio like podcasts. So in the other video in this channel, in the previous video in this channel, I showed you all of these actions and I showed you how to work with them. In this video, we are going to go over the code, and this is if you're interested in writing your own rescripts and learning Lua, then you can watch this to learn how I developed my own rescripts, and you can learn some from what I'm doing. Anyway, let's jump right in. So I have here the first of the scripts, and I'm not going to explain everything again about how they work and what they do. You can watch the other video for that. Now let's just dive into the code for this. This is the simplest, and we are going to go from the simplest to the more complex. The play or stop, move, edit cursor, or to play cursor is pretty much a custom action in Reaper. So in Reaper, you can always come to the actions menu and create a new custom action, which is just a series of actions that you can drag. And now anytime you run this action, it will run all of them in series. This rescript in Spirit is pretty much that. The reason why I developed the rescript as opposed to just telling people to use the custom action is that I think it's easier to distribute a rescript because you can put the rescript in repack and you can tell people to just go to your repository and download everything, and then it will appear here in the list of actions. And the same is not true of custom actions. As far as I can tell, there is no easy way for you to distribute or even to just install a custom action on someone else's machine. You have to tell them to download a file that is a custom action and then come here to keymap and import shortcut keymap. So it's kind of convoluted. It's better to use repack, and repack doesn't support sharing custom actions. In any case, this is pretty much just a custom action. The way I developed this is I am running this command, this function that runs a command as if you ran it from here from the actions menu. So I found the actions that I wanted, the one that moves the edit cursor to the play cursor, and that is only relevant when you are playing, and then your play cursor is the yellow bar, and you want to move the edit cursor, the green bar, to the yellow bar when you're stopping. And so you do that move, and then you stop. And then what I did here is I'm calling this function is just running the command. The second argument is a flag that is always 0. The first argument is the number that is the ID. So if you don't have this column showing up that shows you the IDs of the actions, like so, what you have to do is right click and click here on show action IDs. And then all you have to do is just find the actions you want. For instance, if you wanted to copy tracks, you could right click and copy selected action command ID, come here, and now this is one more action in this rescript. And I also put some comments here showing the name of the action. So I copy selected action text and paste it here just for documentation so people know what action this is running. But this is just a comment. Of course, it could be wrong or out of sync. And this is pretty much it. I guess the main important thing here is how do you find the actions that you want for the thing you want to do? And that it boils down to just trial and error, Googling around, searching the forums. And in this case, for this particular action, I found this series of commands in a video by Reaper Mania. And I guess the idea of it came from a comment by the Reaper blog. So anyway, you just have to Google around. And there are some terms that are used everywhere in Reaper. For instance, if you have something that has to do with items, then there is a pretty good chance, especially if the thing is like with selected items, there is a pretty good chance that the action you're looking for has selected items in the name. You can see that there are a bunch of actions with these terms there. And that's just because there are these certain names that are used, the language that is used throughout, even in the actions that come with Reaper, and then the actions that come with SWS, and then the actions that come with repack. They all tend to share this terminology. So you can kind of search for these terms. And of course, you can always also come here to any rescript, click on edit action and go to API help, Or I guess you can also come here to help and then rescript documentation. That gets you to the same place. Or you can search for Ryan Reaper API rescript. Something like that will get you to his version. Yeah, probably this one. That looks better. It is still the same material, the same documentation, but it looks better. In any case, you can always search here as well, and you may find something that gets you in the right direction as far as finding the right language for the thing you're looking at. So there are the idea of tracks, and then the idea of media items, and then each media item may contain multiple takes, and then all the takes can have an effects chain and names and so on. You can also double click on stuff and maybe you will find some language that you care about, like grid and nodes and snap. So those are all keywords that you can use to find the actions you want for building your rescript. And when there are actions that do the thing you want, then it's always a good idea to use the actions as opposed to re-implementing the action in your rescript, especially if, as it happens in this case, if the custom action or the action you want is one that is built into Reaper. Anyway, let's go to the next one. It is also one of these, just a custom action turned into a rescript. The difference is just which actions are being invoked here. So in this one, I go to the start of the time selection and I hit play. And of course, that is for the action that if you have a time selection, your cursor is here. So if you just hit play, it plays from there. But if I hit this other keystroke, then it plays from the start of my... let's go to that action. So it's liafac play. Yeah, play from start of time selection. There you go. So it plays from the start of the time selection, like so. And the way I built this is just go to the start of the time selection and hit play. Next, let's talk about the actions that are very simple. They are just a way for you to set something on and off for things that by default would only have toggles. Let me explain this in more detail. So we're talking about grid lines here in this case, and grid lines are these lines that are showing here in the arrange view, these lines here. And by default, there is a toggle grid lines. Yes, it comes with Reaper. This action comes with Reaper, and you can run it, and it will toggle that option for you. It goes on and off. But there are some cases in which you may have a custom action or whatever you're doing, and you may want to set this off. And you don't know in which state it is, but you want to set it off. And you could just maybe query this using cycle actions in SWS. There is this concept of cycle action in which you can query the state of a custom, of any action that has a state. But it's much simpler if you had something that allowed you to just set the grid lines on and off. So now the grid lines are on, and I can run this as many times as I want. It sets it off. And I can run this other one as many times as I want, and it sets it on. So the idea behind this custom this rescript is that it's going to run the toggle grid lines, but first it's going to query the state. So it's going to look at the state of this action. So the toggle grid lines is on and off, depending on whether the grid lines are on and off. And you can query the state. So this function is similar to this one, except that it takes the arguments in a different order and the arguments mean different things. But what this is going to do is not run the command, it's going to query the state of the command. And the first argument that you need to pass is the context of the command, because there are all these different contexts, commands that run on the main window, commands that run on the Media Explorer or the media or the media editor. So there are commands for these specific parts. For instance, if you are here on the media editor, there are actions that run here. But we are talking about the range view, so we are talking about the main area, the main section. That's why we are passing 0 here as the argument. The second argument is the number that identifies the action that we want to query. And this is going to return either 0 or 1. If it returns 0, it's because the the state is off, and it's going to return 1 if the state is on. Now, what I do next is something that I think is really clever. I could just literally have a number here like 0 or 1, and I could check if the state is 0 and I run it, I'm turning it on. So if I have code that looks like this is to set grid lines on. And similarly, I can do this because I'm going to check the state. If the state is on and then I run, then this is going to always turn the grid lines off. And you may note that I'm not running this action if the thing is already off, because then this will be false. But I wanted to avoid the repetition of having very similar code in 2 different rescripts, because I would need a set grid lines on and a set grid lines off, and they would be pretty much the same code except for this number that would appear right here. It would either be 0 or 1. So instead of having this repeated code, instead of having repetition there, what I did instead is I'm looking at the name of the file, and the name of the file is going to determine what I do. So here in Reaper, you can see that the names of the files really are set grid lines on and off. And what I do in the script is I look at the name of the file. So this getActionContext function returns a lot of information about the file and about the context in which the file is running. In particular, the second thing it returns is the name of this rescript. And it's not only the name leafac setGridLines.lua, but also everything else. So it starts with /users/leafac/ library / application support, and so on. It's the full path to the script. And I want to match to get only the parts that are at the end. So this match is going to match the end of the string. So I'm ignoring everything from the beginning. And then there is the .lua part on the name of the file. And the dot needs to be escaped because this is a Lua pattern. It's similar to regular expressions, but not really. They are less powerful, but faster than regular expressions. But in any case, so what this is doing is escaping. This character is escaping the dot, because otherwise a dot would mean anything at all, which I guess would kind of also work, but in any case. And then on, I'm checking if the file ends with the word on, which is the case for this one, but not the case for that one, right? So I am looking at the name of the file to determine whether I should be checking for 0, the action is off, or 1, the action is on. And this way, with a single file, with exactly the same text, with exactly the same code, I can do both the on and off, because I just have to have 2 files with the same contents with different names. And based on the name, the task is going to do the right thing. The action is going to either turn the grid lines on or off. So I should explain this trick, and then I'm going to explain the trick of how I create the files. So this trick here is, if the string matches, so if the name of the file ends with on.lua, then this whole thing I selected is true. And then I do a Boolean operation, true and 0. Well, 0 is considered true as well in Lua, so it just returns whatever it is considered true. So in Lua, true is true, of course, but also any string, any number, anything at all, any table is considered true as well. The only things that are false and nil. And this string match returns nil if there is no match, but it returns not nil. It returns something that it holds true, and then that and something else that also is true. That whole thing will return the thing that was true. So in this case, 0. The last thing that was true, in this case, 0. And then this or 1 is, okay, so if the whole thing, this whole thing, is false or nil, I think it returns nil. If this thing is nil, then nil and anything will be false. So it jumps right to this other part. And false or nil or anything will be anything, in this case 1. So this is effectively saying, okay, so if you match on the name of the file, then return 0. If you don't, then return 1. It is similar to what you would find in other languages, but written in a different way. So in other languages, you would see something like this. You would see a question mark here, and that the other languages I'm referring to are C, JavaScript, Java, and so forth. So in all these languages, you would see something like this, a ternary operator. The question mark is being replaced by n, and the column is being replaced by or. Okay, so that's the trick of how to come up with the numbers based on the name of the file. But what about the names of the files themselves? You can see the names of the files here are different from the name of the file here. Well, that's a trick I'm playing when packaging the REScript. And I think it's a clever trick. What I do is I just have one source because, as I said, the two REScripts share the same source. So in my repository, in my actual GitHub repository, I have only one of these files. And then when packaging, what I'm doing is I am looking at this source, the set grid lines file. You can see that it's this file over here, same story as the one we had open here. So we have that file being referred to twice. You can see it here, but you can also see it there. Exactly the same file with exactly the same name, under exactly the same commit identifier. So it's literally the same file. But when packaging this, I am saying that there are two different sources and they have different names for the files. So when installing this, Repack will look at all these file names and will create files with these names, but it will look at the contents that it finds over here. So it's going to take this same file, this one we are creating here, and it's going to install it twice under different names. And the names are going to be what determine the action itself. So the names are going to be what determine whether you're setting the grid lines off or on. So this way we are avoiding a lot of repetition in the code, but we are still getting all the functionality because of this trick I'm playing when packaging. And this is something you can do when you have scripts like the multicam script I have, that it's just literally looking at the file name to get a number, because my multicam script, it is literally the same script to change different cameras, and it just has to look, the script has to look at the number at the end of the file. You can do this for this one I just showed you, where it sets things on and off. And you can do a lot more with this trick, and as we are going to see in the later scripts. Anyway, so that is the set grid lines. The set preserve pitch in audio items when changing the master play rate is literally the same as the one we just saw. The only difference is that I have a different action number here, a different action identifier. But this one it works exactly the same, and I created it for exactly the same reason, because there is already in Reaper a way for you to toggle the preserve pitch in audio items when changing master play rate, but there is no way for you to set it on or off, which may be useful when you're doing custom actions or whatnot. So I created this one as well, also looking at the name of the file, also doing the trick of installing the same file under different names with on and off at the end, using REScript when packaging the file. So that's it. Now let's look at repo delete. In spirit, it's similar to the previous ones, but it is a bit more sophisticated. It has a few more things going on. Let's first look at how we are running the actions. We are also taking a bunch of actions and running them in series. So in effect, this is similar to what you would find in a REScript, in a custom action. But one of the actions I want to run comes from SWS. So in order to be able to run this action, it's not as simple as just copying a number, because the identifier is not really a number. You can see, for instance, for this action, the identifier is this string. And I cannot just come here to Reaper main on command with a string. That will not work. I need a number that identifies this. And the number may change depending on your installation, I think. In any case, you are not able to rely on this name directly. What you have to do is first use this other function called named command lookup, and it's going to, you pass to it the string, for instance, this string, and I guess you also have to pass a flag. And this returns the number that you can use when calling on main command. So there is this wrinkle. Because I'm using SWS, you have to do this two-part dance to actually call the thing. And I wanted to extract this into its own function. This whole two-part dance, I wanted to extract it into its own function so I would be able to just say run this and it would do the right thing. So this run function, it takes as arguments the description and the identifier. The description is really just for two reasons. The first is when you say run, when you're using this function, I wanted you to say the name of the action you're running. It's similar to that comment we had on previous files, this comment. But now, because I am extracting this into a function, I'm making this into an explicit parameter. So it's very clear what you're running. But the second reason I'm doing this is for the error message. We'll talk about this error message in a second. The second argument is the identifier, which may be a string in case you are doing something with SWS or a rescript. You can see that for rescripts, what you get for identifier is also a string, one that looks like this. And then you are also able to pass a number in case your action is one that comes with REAPER, in which case you already have a number for the identifier because it comes with REAPER, the number is baked in. In any case, you have these two arguments. And then the first thing I do is I check what is the type of the argument that you passed. If it's a number, then you already have a number, so you just get the identifier number from the identifier. And that's this case right here. Otherwise, if the type of the identifier is a string, then I will do that. I will do that named command lookup I just talked about. And you can see again here the trick of using and or in place of a ternary operator. And whatever the case may be, your identifier number will be a number, either because it was already a number or because you just converted it into a number. And then I check, is the identifier number 0? That can only happen in one circumstance. You tried to do a lookup and the lookup failed. If named command lookup fails, it returns 0. And I check for that because I want to give you a good error message. This error message is saying that it could not find the command, and then it uses that description. So that's the second reason why I have descriptions here. It also gives you the identifier that you tried to look up and failed. And then it gives you an explanation. And that explanation is just for the benefit of the user, saying that they need to install SWS and the packages from the repack repositories. And then it also gives the user some ways for them to report if they think this is a bug, because if you already have installed everything on which my scripts depend and you're still running into this error, then you should definitely report this as a bug. And then I'm using the error Lua function. It's a function that comes with Lua. And error does two things. First, it stops the execution. It stops execution of this script right away. So even if you are in the middle of running this, it will stop the execution. It will not run the following lines. It will just literally stop the execution right here. It's an abort of the whole program. The second thing it does is specific to your application. It depends on where you're running Lua. And when we are running Lua in Reaper, this shows up as a window with some text on it. And that's what the user can look at, and they can see what the error is and maybe report if something is wrong or follow the instructions and install SWS, whatever. It's just a box with some text. And then if that is okay, if you went through the checks and you have a number for the command you want to run, then you actually run same way we ran commands on the previous rescripts we looked at. So that's what this run function is all about. It's a way for me to encapsulate the idea of looking up actions by name, also giving you meaningful error messages and stopping the execution in case something fails. So if you don't have this script available, my script will not work. And then you should just stop execution. That's what the run function does. Next, there are this other thing that we need to talk about, and that is we are now doing two different things that are undoable. Because on the scripts we looked at, there was nothing to undo. For instance, when you play and you stop, the first three scripts we looked at, when you play and stop, there is nothing for you to undo. What would you undo? Would you put the edit cursor back where it was? That doesn't really make sense. So there was no undo. But in this one, there is a notion of undoing. You may want to undo a repo delete. So you select some part of the items and you do a repo delete, and then you want to undo that. And you don't want to undo in parts. So you don't want to undo each part of the repo delete in turn. So you do this dance here, and you're going to see this in many RE scripts where you say, where should you start the undo collection? So it's going to now collect all the actions you run and up to the end block. So when you hit undo, it's going to undo everything in between the selected parts. And then in this undo block, you should pass a description. That's what shows up. So if I run my action here, I ran the repo delete, that's what shows up here under the undo history. And I could just literally write the name repo delete, but since we just learned the trick of looking at the file name, I'm doing the same thing here. So I'm looking at the file name using getActionContext, getting the second output, and then doing a string match. And this time, I'm matching at the end of this string with the .lua, but I'm also matching my name in the beginning, because every one of my actions starts with my name, and then I check the whatever is in between. So similar to a regular expression, and I'm using dot here to mean any character at all, plus to mean one or more of them, parentheses to mean I am capturing this part of the pattern. This is the part that I want to have as my output of the match. And that is going to just get, in this case, anything between liafac underscore and .lua, so repo delete, which is the name of my action. And then the second argument for undo end block is -1, because I want to undo everything that these actions did. I could be more selective or try to optimize using different arguments here, but I think it's better to always use -1. And then the thing that is left for me to explain is what's going on with these actions. Well, a repo delete is based pretty much on this one, this action. It removes the contents of a time selection moving later items. And the reason why I have this particular action is that if your time selection is not in an item, then you couldn't work, even with repo delete, you could not delete these parts and make them move. But even if you don't have repo delete enabled, this action, the remove contents of time selection, will move everything. It will delete that part, and it will even move markers. So you can see marker 1 here. It moves along with the rest of the repo edit, which is exactly what I want in my custom repo delete. So that's why I'm using this custom action. Or this is not a custom action. This comes with REAPER, really. So what is going on with this other one? It's just that if you have some item selected, but you don't have any time selection, you have an item selected, or a bunch of items really, but you have no time selection, and you hit my repo delete, then let's see first what would happen with this time selection remove contents of selected time, moving later items. So if I just run this one, I have a selected item, I have no time selection. When I run this, I get an error, which is annoying because really the intent is very clear. I would like to delete this item. So I am using this SWS action that sets the time selection to selected items only if there is no time selection. So let's check this out. So now that I have no time selection and I run this, it sets a time selection. But if I have some items selected, but I have a time selection somewhere else, Okay, so that's the situation. I have a time selection and I have some items selected and I run this. It skips. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the time selection. So if I have some time selection, then my ripple delete is going to act on the time selection. But if I have no time selection and I have some items selected, my ripple delete will delete the items. Or really, it will delete the whole chunk of time in which the items appear. That's the ripple delete that I use for editing these videos, for editing podcasts. Anything that I need to cut, I use my ripple delete, this guy. Now let's go to this other one. It is called Prepare Project for Editing. I'm using a similar trick to the one I used before, in that I am packaging the Prepare Project for Editing twice when I'm doing the packaging in Repack. I am deploying this script. I am installing this script twice in two different places for audio and video. So they are really two different actions that share the same source, the same code. But the reason why I'm doing this now is that there are some parts that are specific for preparing a project for video, but most of the preparation is the same, regardless of whether you're working with a podcast, but that is just audio, or if you are doing a video like this. So I have the same code for both, and I'm going to look at the action name to determine whether I am doing video or not. And if I'm doing video, then I'm going to do some extra things, but otherwise everything else is shared. So let's start. First off, I'm taking the action name and assigning that to a variable because I'm going to use it in multiple places. I'm going to use it here, I'm going to use it there. So this use is already familiar, right? It's just the end of an undo block that starts here. All fine and good. Then I'm checking, is there the word video in my action name? So prepare project for video editing or audio editing, right? When I actually run the actions after having installed them, they are actually going to be named prepare project for audio editing or video editing. So do I have the video word in my action name? And if I do, then I am doing a video. That's all there is to this part. And of course, later we are going to look at whether we are doing video in order to do video specific stuff. Then I have a variation on the run function we just looked at before, but it's actually combining two different ideas. So this run function in this prepare project for editing action, so this run function is combining two ideas. The first idea is the idea we looked at in the ripple delete, which is the original definition of run, and that is just looking up identifiers that are strings. So for actions that are installed with SWS or Repack, that's why I have the run function to begin with. So it's doing that. It's even showing me the error messages and everything. But it's also doing the other thing we looked at before. So remember how we could look at the state of an action to toggle, to set on and off the properties like preserve pitch in audio items when changing the master play rate. And we also looked at the other one for setting the grid lines. We were able to look at the state and only run toggle when the state required. So if we want to turn the grid lines off, we could look at the state of the toggle grid lines action before we actually run it. And only if it's on, then we turn it off. But if it's off, we leave it off. Well, this variation of the run function also takes an optional extra argument called isOn. And you pass a boolean, either true or false. And then it's going to check. So before it actually runs, it's going to check, did you pass me isOn? If you did not, then if you did not, you always want to run the action. If you didn't pass me the isOn variable, it's nil. And you can call, for instance, in this case, we are calling run without an extra third argument because it's optional. By default, Lua will just pass nil to that argument. It will fill in the spaces with nil. And in that case, if you're not passing me a third argument, it means you don't care about its current state. There may not even be a current state in this action. Always run the command. For instance, in this case, it will always run this command. But if you have passed me is on, then it's either true or false. For instance, here in this case, we are doing exactly the toggle grid line. So now you know where that other action came from. It was extracted from this. So if you are doing toggle grid lines, you will only want to set the thing off. And of course, I guess I could call my other script to do this for me, but I thought it would be nicer to do this without having the dependency between the scripts. So if you wanted to, you could install just the prepare project for editing without having to install the other script. Anyway, I think it's a good idea not to introduce dependencies between scripts when it is so simple to do something like the thing I'm doing here. So if you pass false to is on, then you're going to do a ternary thing again, a ternary operator again, to turn the Boolean into a number. So if the thing is true, it turns into a 0. If the thing is false, it turns into a 1, which may sound reversed, but think about it. You're toggling something, right? When you're toggling something, you want, is the thing on? If the thing is on, then you only want to run the toggle if you would like it to be on, but it's currently not. Right? So if the thing is currently off and you would like it to be on, then you should run the action. So this is on thing is not whether it's currently on, it's whether you would like it to be on, which I think makes sense when you're running it, right? So you're running toggle grid lines and you would like it to be false. You would like to set the grid lines off. So you pass false. So is on is checking. Is the thing on? If it's on, then I should only run the action. If you'd like it to be on, I should only run the action if it's currently not on, if it's off. Anyway, so that's the variation of the run function. And then the rest of this is pretty much a custom action turned into a rescript. Because I'm running a bunch of things, and I found all these things just by looking at the Reaper blog video that showed me how to set up a project for video editing, and then some Googling around, some searching on the actions box. I was doing some searching here, and I found all the things I wanted. So I wanted to set my unit of measurement not with bars and measures, but with hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And the secondary time unit, I don't need any. This is the secondary. I don't need that. So I turn it off, and then I use my run function to turn off preserve pitch audio, turn off the grid lines. No, turn on preserve pitch audio, turn off the grid lines. Next, there are some things that I cannot change using rescripts. As far as I can tell, there is no API for you to change those things. And in any case, they are things that you may want to set depending on your project. For instance, the sample rate. So if you're working with 48 kilohertz or working with 44.1 kilohertz, it depends on your project, the media that you have. So I don't do anything in the rescripts. I just show you a message box, right? MB, message box, of course. Why not? And then I check, is this a video project? If so, I'm going to tell you to change these 3 things. So it's just going to pop a message box. The user is going to look at the message box and see, oh, I need to do this and that. Okay, hit OK and do this and that. So these are the 3 things you need to set when you're doing video. And that's the least you have to do. You may want to change more in the project, but that's the least you have to change. Or if it's an audio project, the only thing you have to change is the project sample rate, at least, right? You are always welcome to change other things as well. And then I pass 2 other arguments to the message box. This is the title of the message box, and this is what kind of buttons you want to see. In the documentation, the one we looked at here, there is a whole list of numbers you can pass, and you have buttons like OK, or yes and no, or retry, and so on. So this is just going to show a message box. And then when you hit OK, it will actually run this next action that opens project settings. So let's see this running. So if I am setting up a project for video editing, for instance, then I run this. So it's going to show me the message box with the title we set. So this title project settings is coming from here. The fact that we only have an OK button is because we are using the number 0. And then this description here comes from this part. And then there are the 3 things I need to set for a video project. I look at them, I hit OK, and then it opens project settings with the things I need to change. And I need to remember the things I need to change. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there is no way for me to show the project settings and the message box at the same time on the screen. So you just have to memorize that you need to change project settings, sample rate, video frame rate, and preferred video size. Another thing I should mention is this syntax for writing strings. If you have strings with new lines, or you have strings with lots of quotes, maybe your string is a command that you want to run on a shell or something, maybe you just have weird characters in there, then you can use this other syntax that delimits the strings not with quotes, but with these 2 brackets. And if you have them nested, you can even put some equal signs here. As long as they match, for instance, 3 equal signs, then it's also a delimiter for a string. And you can have new lines on these strings, unlike strings delimited with quotes, in which you cannot have new lines. So I don't think that this is valid. I'm not sure about it, but I don't think that's valid. Anyway, so we are at this point. Now we are going to turn other settings off. This is a setting that comes here on this menu. So this is going to set that off. Then it's going to show another one of these message boxes, and it's going to open the snap grid settings. So I'm going to hit OK here. So this is a menu that you can access if you right-click on the grid or if you right-click on snap. And it's another one of those things that I cannot change for you in ReScript. As far as I can tell, there is no API for that. I am able to set this off, which is what I want. The grid snap settings follow grid visibility. There is no grid. I turned off the grid, so that makes sense. I'm turning off, right? I'm turning off the grid snap settings follow grid visibility. I have to use SWS for that, and that's why we need this whole shenanigans of doing a command lookup. And I am also doing the toggling. So I'm checking first before doing the toggling. So if you already have this turned off, if this is already turned off, then I don't run the action again because that would turn it on. And it only makes sense to talk about this whole shenanigans if you're doing video, right? But I want to set this on and off even when you're doing audio, because if you already have this off, then I want to turn this on when you're doing audio, because I don't want to grid. I turned off the grid and I don't want any snapping at all. So I turn this on, it will not snap. But if you are doing video, then I tell you to come here in the message box. I tell you to set the grid spacing to frame and the minimum to 0. And this way, when we are moving things around, it's now moving in units of frames. You can see in the yellow box next to my cursor that it's always moving a certain amount of frames. And you can see that it's kind of jumping from one frame to the next. And when I zoom all the way in, I'm able to see each frame in the grid. So you can see it's moving by frame. And then there is the undo block and the undo unblock at the end. And now you just saw a different use of looking at the file name to determine what the file should do. It's now not just turning things on and off or looking at the multicam camera number. It's doing much more. It's looking at the file name and it's determining parts of the action, which messages to show to the user and whether or not to do some parts of the action. And you can go crazy with this. I mean, if you want to, you could have just one ReScript in your repository, and that ReScript has a big if-then-else block that looks at the name of the ReScript and does something different. So it could group together scripts that are completely unrelated, like the multicam, auto mixer setup. You could do all of them in one big script using this one trick. You just look at the action number to determine what you're going to do. Of course, that's a terrible idea. You only want to do that when you have things that are related. things that would share most of the code anyway. Okay, so that's this one. Now let's talk about the final two. They are related, but they don't share as much code. So in this case, I have them as two separate scripts, the group tracks into a folder and ungroup tracks from within folders. From all the actions we looked at in this video, these two are probably the most complex because they are not just a custom action turned into a rescript. They are actually doing some logic. They have an algorithm in them. Let's start with group tracks into a folder. So the first thing we want to check is whether you have any tracks selected or not. If you don't have any tracks selected, there is no way for me to group them into a folder. And I just give you an error message using MB message box. And return means we are not in any function body here. So this is just going to stop the execution. But could we use something like error, the error function that comes with Lua? We looked at this function in a previous script. Well, it's not a good idea because error means catastrophic error, unrecoverable error. Something is wrong with your installation error. And when you have no track selected and you try to group them into a folder, this is just, okay, you forgot to select some tracks. That's fine. We can recover from this. Select some track and run me again. You don't have to fiddle around with your Reaper installation. So this is not the same nature of error, and I'm signaling this error in a much less severe way. But I still want the script to stop here, and then I use the return word to stop the execution of the script. So you can think of the whole script as if it was a big function body, and this is returning from that function body. And of course, this return value doesn't mean anything. It just means I want to do this message box and then stop the execution. In the other scripts, when we wanted to throw an error, we were already inside a function body, so just doing return here would return from this function call, but it would not stop the execution of the whole script. So we couldn't even use return here, but we can use it here. Next, we are going to look at, oh, I forgot to mention this part. What this is doing is, I guess the name kind of is obvious in this case. It is counting the number of selected tracks, and if you have no track selected, that number is 0, but if you have 5 tracks selected, that number would be number 5. And 0 just means I care about my currently open project. You could open new project tabs, and you could refer to different tabs in your rescript, but in this case, we want the one that is currently open. So for instance, this one right now. Next, we are going to look at the index of the parent. So the parent of the group of tracks is the track that is a folder, that is going to be a folder. We are creating it, but it's going to be a folder. And we want to know where to create it because you may have a bunch of tracks and you have some of them selected. So let me get this out of the way. You may have some of them selected. And now you want to create a new track right here between 1 and 2. And that new track will be the parent. We want to know the index of that. So what we do is, first, we get the selected track on the current project. So if there are multiple tabs, that's the current one, the same 0 as we had here. These two zeros selected, they are the same. And then you could have multiple tracks selected. Which one do you want? For instance, in this case, I have 2 tracks selected. In this case, I have 3 tracks selected. Which one do I want? Well, I want the first of the selected tracks. That's this other 0. So in this case, I'm getting track number 2. And then I want to get some information from that track. In particular, I want to get the track number. In this case, the number 2. To do that, I need to query that track with getMediaTrackInfoValue, which is a terrible name. And I need to pass as argument this magic string that I got from the documentation, IP track number. This is going to get this number, the number 2. But tracks are numbered from 1 on, but they are indexed from 0 on. So this is track 1 here in the editor. In Reaper, we look at it as track 1, but internally, this is known as track number 0. Track index 0 is track 1. Track index 1 is track 2, and so on. So that's why I subtract 1 here. And now I have the index at which I want to insert a new track. That's what I do next. Insert track at index of this guy. Why do I have to pass through here? I don't even remember. Then, and this is just probably something I got from reading some other rescripts or looking at the documentation. I think I remember looking at another rescript that is very similar to this one that groups tracks into folders, but you have to give it a name. I talk about this in the other video in which I demo this rescript. Okay, next. What we want to do is to set the depth, the folder depth of the parent. Okay, let's talk about this in parts. First of all, I just created a new track on that index. Now I need to get that track. I need to pass 0 as my current project, parent index as the index of this new track. So at this point, we have a new track. We have 3 of them selected. We just created this new track in position number 2. And now with this, get track. So remember that track 2 is index 1, and that's parent index 1. So get track is going to get me this track. It's going to get me track number 2, and I can do stuff to it. What I want to do to it is to set one of these properties. So before we got one of these properties, the track number, now we are going to set a track folder depth. And now I have to use set media track info value. I have to pass in this special magic string that I got from the documentation and from reading that other script. And I need to pass true as my last argument. I guess that is always necessary. True is to say that I'm setting. Yeah, the API is ridiculous. And then I need to pass the value that I want to set. And to talk about this value, I need to explain how Reaper represents tracks and folders internally. A track can be either a regular track, like all of these tracks. You can click here to cycle between that. It can be a track, a regular track, a folder. So a folder contains a bunch of other tracks. Or it can be the last track in a folder, like so. And of course, if the folder is within a folder like that, a track can be the last folder from the innermost folder, or it can be the last folder of both folders. And this goes on and on. If I had yet another track here on top, that is a parent of everyone, and then this one that is the innermost here, it can be the last of, it can be a regular track, it can be a parent of other tracks, it can be the last of the innermost folder, or the last of both innermost folders, or it can be the last of all innermost folders, like so. Internally in Reaper, this is represented as the folder depth of a given track. Regular tracks have a folder depth of 0. Folders have a folder depth of 1. And tracks that are the last of their folder, so in this case, track 6 is folder depth 0. Now it's folder depth 1. Now it's folder depth minus 1 because it is the last of its folder. Now it's minus 2 because it's the last of the 2 containing folders. Now it's minus 3 because it's the last of the 3 containing folders, and so on. So a track depth may be 0 for normal tracks, 1 for folders, and negative numbers for tracks that end parents. And this is a bizarre way to represent folders, but that's the internal representation of folders in Reaper. And if you want to work with folders, that's what you have to do. You have to understand how this works. Well, the parent is kind of easy. Because I want the parent to be a folder, I can set a depth of 1. That is always the case. It's always the depth of 1. And a folder can be a folder containing other folders. It doesn't matter. Its depth is 1. Now I'm going to do a lookup for where I should put the minus 1. to close the folder. Okay, so let's delete all of these and create a bunch of tracks. So suppose I have selected these two, okay? At this point, what we did so far in the ReScript is we created a new track. So we have these two selected. We created a new track and we set it to be a parent. So we are in this state. That's what the ReScript did so far. Now, the problem is that track 6 and 7 should not be in the folder. So what I need to do next is to look up where I should put that -1 that is going to put an end to this folder. Well, the easiest thing to do is to just start on the last selected item and say that its index is -1. And that works in very limited cases, right? Because if you have tracks like this, they are on the top level, and you're just creating a simple folder like that, then that is the case. So what I need is just go to the last of the selected tracks and say that its index, its folder depth is -1. So let's start with that. So you are going to get the selected track. So we are going to get a selected track. Which selected track? Remember, first, a selected track in the current tab, and then a selected track that is the last one. So the last selected track is count the number of selected tracks. So say you have 5 selected tracks. Remember that they are indexed by 0. So if you have 5 selected tracks, the last one will have index 4. In this case, we have 2 selected tracks, so the index is 1. Well, you count the number of selected tracks, that's 2 selected tracks, -1, that gives you an index of 1. So that's going to get the last selected track. Now, next, we are going to look at its index. It's track number. So we're going to look at the track number, for instance, 5 here. We're going to look at this 5. How do we get that? Well, we are going to get value. So the same thing we did here. Get the value of the track number and subtract 1. So my track number is 5. The index is 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you could just get this and do a set media track info value, get that track, and that would work for this specific case. And then, you could just do something like this. You set the media track folder using the track that we just collected here. You say that its depth is -1. That would work for this specific case. But suppose that the last track you have selected is a folder itself. So I'm trying to make that work. Suppose you have this scenario and you don't have that parent yet. So you're in this situation, right? And you want to group. So suppose you have these 2 selected and you want to run your group tracks into a folder ReScript. Well, we don't want this track to be the last of the parent. So we would be in a situation where we would have created a new track, put these 2 in that one. But we don't want this last selected track, we don't want its depth to be -1. That would be this. That's not what we want. We don't want this track to be the last one. What we want is to preserve the folder structure, and we want the result to look like this. So we want to preserve this track number 5 as a folder. So we could not just come here and say that its depth is -1. So what we do instead is a search. What we do is a search. We start from that last selected track. We go up to the last track in the project because the search may fail. So we are going to count the number of tracks. In this case, we have 9 tracks, -1 because we need to subtract 1 to get the index of the track. So track 9 has index 8. And we are going to do a search with the track index. So we're going to do a for loop that is going to go from track index is the last selected track to track index is the last track in the project. And then we're going to do a bunch of things here in this loop. We are doing a search. And it looks like this. We're going to start here. So that's my 5, my last selected track. I'm going to get that track by index. And I'm going to get the depth of that track. And then I have a running counter. I started this running counter before the loop. It starts with 0. And I'm going to add to the running counter my current depth. So for instance, in this case, my current depth is 1. So my current depth is 0. My track depth is 1. So my current depth ends up being 1. And then I'm going to look at the children, and I'm going to keep looking until either my current depth is 0 or it's negative. Why is that? Well, how would my current depth be 0? That would be if you had something like this, right? So you start in track 5 that has a depth of 1. So your current depth is 1. Then you go to track 6. Your current depth is now 1. It continues to be 1 because track 6 is a regular track. It has depth of 0. This track has depth of -1 because it closes the parent folder. So now my depth is of 0. And when that happens, then I want to close the folder. I want to close the folder I just created, this one. Remember, we started this whole shenanigans by creating this track here. And I want this track to be the one that closes that one. So we created this new one because we wanted to group these two. We looked at the last one that was selected, and we went on until we found a track that was closing that was closing track 5. When we found that, then the current depth is either 0, as is in this case, or it could be, for instance, this. It could be -2. If track 7 is -2, then your current depth that was 1 turns into -1. And then in that case, you also want to close the parent folders as well. So you're checking, do I have a current depth of 0 or less? And in that case, it means I just closed all the folders that I had open. So you could have even folders within folders here. And then you would start in track 5 and you would say, okay, track current depth is 1. It's now 2. It's 2. It's still 2. It's now 1. And now it is -1. Okay, so in that case, then I want to close my parent folder that I just created. So only when the current depth is less than or equal to 0, then I do the thing that sets the track depth -1. So that's the current track depth, because remember, this track could be closing other tracks as well, and I wanted to close one more folder, the one I just created. So it's one more. So it's track depth -1. And then I break from this whole loop because my work here is done. So that's how the group tracks into a folder works. This whole loop is kind of convoluted, but it's just a way of traversing the tracks and finding the one that closes the folders so that I can close the new folder I just created. That's how group tracks into a folder works. Now let's look at ungroup tracks from within folders. It starts the same way by checking whether you have some tracks selected, and it does a loop. Now this time it's doing a loop to search for all the tracks you selected that are folders. So for instance, if I do a selection like this, and I run my ungroup thing, what I want ungroup to do is to get rid of track number 3 because it's a folder, get rid of tracks 5 and 6 because they are folders as well, and I want to flatten tracks 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So when I run this, and I bound this to a keyboard shortcut so I can run this now, it got rid of all the tracks I mentioned and it flattened the structure. So it only kept the 3 tracks that were these 3 that are selected right now. And of course, it also kept the other ones because they're there, but it has flattened the structure. It got rid of tracks 3, 5, and 6. So in this outer loop, I am traversing all the selected tracks, starting with the last one and going down. So it starts, so if I have selected all of these again, it starts with track 8 and goes up, and the index goes down. So it goes up here with respect to the interface, or goes down with respect to these numbers. So I'm going from the number of selected tracks -1, that's my last selected track, that's track number 8, going down to 0, and it's taking negative steps. So this for loop has 3 parts: where it starts, where it ends, and where it is, the step it takes to get there. Why do I need to be explicit about this step? Well, because if you have not selected any tracks, then this would not work, but really you have already checked for this. So I guess this -1 is kind of redundant, but it's a good idea to have it there so that if this number was maybe -1, which I don't think it could ever be, but if it was -1, it would not try to do a loop from -1 to 0, right? So it's always a good idea. If you're going to go down in your loop, then always put -1 to be explicit. Okay, so you did this. Why are you doing this? Why are you going from tracks from down up? Well, the reason for that is that we are going to delete some of the tracks. And when we delete the tracks, the indices of all the following tracks are going to change. So when I delete track number 6, then track 7 becomes 6, 8 becomes 7, and so on. So when I'm deleting tracks, it's smart for me to do it in reverse, because when I change by deleting track 6, it's not going to change the indices of all the remaining tracks I still have to visit. Okay, when we did this, next we are going to look at the selected track by getting its index and getting the selected track by index. And we are checking whether it is a folder. Folders have depth of 1. If it is a folder, then I'm going to do a bunch of things to actually delete that folder. But if it's not a folder, I'm just going to skip it. So for tracks 8, 7, 4, and 2 in this loop, I'm going to just skip them because I don't need to ungroup tracks that are not folders. I'm going to ignore the selected tracks. Okay, but how do I actually, when I'm, for instance, in number 6, how do I do the deletion of this folder? Well, it's the converse of the action we looked at. If this one was creating a folder, so it was creating a new track and setting its depth to 1. So if this one was creating a folder, then this one is deleting a folder. Of course, it's doing that, the order in reverse as well. So if the first thing this one is doing is creating a folder, then the last thing this one is doing is to delete that folder. And of course, this works even if you didn't create the folder using the group tracks into a folder task, right? You could just use Ungroup Tracks from within folders with folders you created here with the user interface. I did not use my REAPER to create this folder. Anyway, so the next thing that the group tracks into a folder did was to find the last selected track and traverse to find the folder close to subtract 1 from its depth. Now what it's doing is it's still going down because we are deleting a folder, so it's still going down. So it's still doing a loop from the last, from the selected track up to the last track in the project. So it's still going from, for instance, here in track 6, when you're deleting this folder, it's still going from track 6 up to the last folder, the last track in the project. But now, and it's still doing the folder depth thing. So it's getting the track depth, it's keeping track of the current depth, and it's checking whether the current depth is negative. Because when it is, you just found the track that closes the current one. And when it does, when you found that track, you set its depth to +1. So if the other task, the other rescript, was subtracting 1 from the depth to make it close yet another folder, in this case, we are adding 1 to that track folder depth to say that it's no longer closing one folder because we are about to delete that folder. And so there is some similarity. This whole part here is similar to this whole part here. And the delete track is similar to insert track at index. They are related, but they are not really the same. So it wouldn't make sense for me to share any amount of code between them. And that's why I have them as two separate files. But that is how this one works. And that about covers everything I wanted to say about all the rescripts I created. So thanks for watching this. I hope this helps you if you are getting into rescripts and if you're coming up with this small little tasks like the rescripts I showed you in the beginning, where it's just really a custom action in disguise. But even if you have some algorithms like the one I had to do to find the folders and the tracks that are closing folders and whatnot, even if you're doing that kind of thing, I hope this video helps you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because I have more videos about coding in Reaper and in other places as well. Coming up, I have videos about Node.js and about cool things you can do with Reaper even without programming, about JS effects if you want to do some audio programming to process audio in real time in Reaper. I have all those kinds of videos coming up, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks a lot for watching this one, and I see you on the next. Bye.